Fab Five, but talk to us a little bit about your view on how you've monitored your KPIs, or the driving KPIs of your business, say over the last 10 years since you started growing, and then shifted into more the CEO role than the practitioner.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brenton, to look at the journey, because in the early days, I didn't really know what to track. I'd worked in 5 or 6 firms, and I think all the firms I'd worked in were chartered accounting firms, and they all did timesheets. And so, I just filled in my timesheet and knew what my productivity was. And that was about where it started, started and stopped. And then when I started my own firm, I just followed, what everyone else does, and we did timesheets, and the whip would go down and would bill it, and that was about it, really. And I didn't have any good structure, no rhyme or reason, and sort of just fumbled along. And then as I got staff and added more staff, and knew that I wanted to step back and keep growing, I really struggled with how to measure the team. Like that was, and that was like the biggest challenge was, well, how do I measure the team? But what the problem was, we might have good productivity, but then I'd find the team would lose some clients, or we might have good responsiveness, but I couldn't build the whip. And so, I had about 5 areas which resulted in the Fab Five. And I always come back to what Vern Harnish, the founder of Gazelles and a global coaching group, he said, running companies is like raising kids. He's got this famous quote, and he says, you only need about 5 rules. He says half a dozen rules, and you can manage it. And and in the process of coming up with a Fab Five, obviously consulted Ed around, are we missing anything? It was always like, well, what else do we need? But is it too much? So, it's like driving a car. You've got a dashboard, and the less gauges we have to look at to know that we're going okay, the better. And so, ran this by Ed and ran it by yourself, and you've got a lot of experience in, other coaching firms and businesses you ran yourself and understanding accounting firms. So we came up with a Fab Five, and I think from my experience in Sky, it covers every corner. And when I say that is whether it's myself as the CEO driving the firm for growth, or actually diverting you could say partners or the managers, senior client managers, performance back to the right corner. It does that, and what it does, it achieves this concept that Ed calls being in control without controlling. And so and what's really interesting, Brenton, is for everyone watching, is that when you take the time out to have your meetings and present these KPIs in front of them, there's something about it that it does affect our actions. It's almost our human nature that we want to be winners. If we're measured against something, we want to win. And I think this concept, Brenton, stems from the day that we go to school. The day that we go to school as little kids, what do we get every 6 months? We get a report card.
That's right.
And then when we go off to secondary school, the emphasis is ramped up more. We get a report card. And then when we go to university, and most of us do if you end up in professional services. And again, we get a report card. We want to pass our exams. And so if you bring this concept all the way through into business, it's no different. And it's in our culture as well in most countries that, you go to the cricket. What's the thing that everyone looks at all day? It's the scoreboard.
The big scoreboard, yeah.
And so why don't we, and I always ask for years, why don't we do that in our business? Why don't we have this awesome scoreboard that we can see how we're going, and everyone knows how we're going. So that's a bit about the journey and why I think, you know, the Fab Five works, and if firms can measure these KPIs and have the meetings, which is the glue that holds it together, you can really have an impact on your direction and reaching your goals.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to be honest, I think what you've done with your Fab Five and the dashboard that you run is probably the best I've seen in any firm that I've ever experienced working with. So I'm excited to share that with everyone and sort of dive into that in a little bit more detail. But I wanted to touch on one of the points you made there and get Ed's feedback, because it seems, Ed, like a lot of firms, the assumption would be that we'd have this fairly well in hand given the nature of the business that we're in. But it seems that a lot of firm owners are driving down the highway without a speedometer or without a dashboard of any nature. And why do you think that is? Or where do we struggle with getting our heads around the concept of what KPIs to monitor in this business to make sure it's thriving?
Yeah, I think the problem is that there is a confusion between running it as a practice versus running it as a business. And if you run it as a practice, that means you're managing it from top down. And from top down management, you've got your finger on everything. You've got control over everything. You know exactly where everything is. So there's less requirement on, you know, systems and tools and measurements, because you know where everything is. But the problem with that kind of management system from top down is that you can't scale that business, and you become a prisoner in that business, because if I take you out of there, that's the end of the business. And now, another word of describing that is having a job. So you've got the job of, you know, keeping control of the business, but you can't scale it because you've only got so many hours in a day. And once you end up, you know, working 60, 70 hours a week, you know, your capacity, your bandwidth runs out and you can't scale it. And that's the reason why we see firms hit about $1 million per partner, and then they've got to bring other people in, other partners in, because the system is not running the business. They're doing it by brute force. And because they have a lack of systems, they've got to bring another partner up, introduce another partner to help control everything. So it's being controlled by partners and not controlled by the system. And often I hear people say, oh, you don't need timesheets anymore. Why do you need timesheets? Well, if you're running a practice and you've only got it so large, and you've got your hands across everything and you've got control over it, then, you know, you may not need the timesheets. But if you want to grow it and scale it, you need it to be managed from bottom up, not from top down. And what I mean by bottom up is you need to have all the systems in place and the processes, and exactly what we've done with Wize mentoring, the foundation in place. And part of that foundation and the systems in place and management from bottom up are your timesheets, because you want everybody to be taking accountability for their own time and everything, and their productivity, because you're not there to look at them. So, you know, unlike a practice where you're there every day and you've got your eye on everybody and you've got your fingerprints across everything, you know, you don't need the timesheets because you're watching everything. But if you want to create a business that works without you, like I've done and Jamie's done now, and you need it to be managed from bottom up. So you've got to have all these systems in place, and you've got to have the measurements in place. You've got to have the accountability in place, so that you don't have to be controlling of everybody, because nobody likes to be controlled. But you as the owner or the shareholder need to feel that, you know, those main KPIs are going up, or they're in an upward trend. So it's all about trend and momentum, not about perfection. And often, you know, if you don't have the systems in place, you can't manage it from bottom up. So when someone says, we don't need timesheets, I'll bet you my bottom dollar they're running it like a practice and not like a business, and they can't scale. And they might be happy to have a job of a certain size, and obviously there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what I wanted, because I wanted the business to work without me, like an investment. He just gives me a passive income.
But
And
then
you
just
need,
on that point, there's a lot of rhetoric in the profession that, you know, one of the goals of a firm should be to rid themselves of timesheets completely. I mean, we've touched on this a few times in other clinics, but can you just touch on this again? And what's your view on that?
well, I think that's absolutely ridiculous, because it's a bit like saying I'm a carpenter and I'm going to rid myself of having a hammer. It's the
Good
tool
point.
to run, you know, like it's the tool to manage the business and to you know, I've often said that if you have an extraordinary system, you can hire ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have an ordinary system, you've got to hire extraordinary people. And the problem with hiring extraordinary people is that they're really hard to find and they're really, really expensive. Now, if you've got a boutique firm and you're able to offer really something that's really unique that clients can't get from anywhere else, then you can get away with that model. But we all do the same things. We all do BASs, we all do compliance, we all do tax. We're all the same. So but the flip side of it, it's highly, if you get the system and built the system so it's extraordinary, you can scale that in a big way. And so you've got the trade-off between the two. But as I said, unless you've got something that's really unique about what you offer, well, unfortunately or unfortunately, we all offer the same thing. And if you don't systematize it and you don't build extraordinary systems, then you have to hire extraordinary people. And then you can't scale that model. And that's why you find firms hit $1 million per partner and they can't scale it anymore, because their systems are ordinary, and therefore they need to hire extraordinary people. So they bring in another partner. And that's the whole problem with not having timesheets and so forth, because you've got to manage it from top down, and that is totally unscalable. And you know, you hit $1 million, and then the worst of all is you're a prisoner in your business, and that's the last thing you want, really.